Hi, I'm Ian Falconer with AWS Training and Certification. Welcome to this introductory course on AWS Lambda, AWS's event-driven serverless compute service. In this course, we're going to talk about AWS Lambda. We'll cover a brief introduction and the service benefits, and dive a little deeper into some key features and concepts. I'll then discuss a few use cases and wrap things up with a quick summary. So what is AWS Lambda? AWS Lambda is a compute service that lets you run code without provisioning or managing servers. AWS Lambda executes your code only when needed and scales automatically to thousands of requests per second. I want to take just a couple of minutes now to review the key benefits of this service. You only pay for the compute you use. You don't pay for compute time when your code is not running. This makes AWS Lambda ideal for variable and intermittent workloads. You can run code for virtually any application or back-end service, all with zero administration. AWS Lambda runs your code on highly available compute infrastructure, which provides all administration, including server and operating system maintenance, capacity provisioning and auto-scaling, code monitoring and logging. AWS Lambda supports a variety of programming languages, including Node.js, Java, C# and Python. How can we use AWS Lambda? We can use it for event-driven computing. You can run code in response to events, including changes to an S3 bucket or an Amazon DynamoDB table. You can respond to HTTP requests using Amazon API Gateway. You can invoke your code using API calls made using the AWS SDKs. You can build serverless applications that are triggered by AWS Lambda functions. And you can automatically deploy them using AWS Code Pipeline and AWS Code Deploy. AWS Lambda is intended to support serverless and microservices applications. To avoid creating monolithic and tightly coupled solutions, AWS Lambda imposes the following configuration options. Your disk space is limited to 512 megabytes. Memory allocation is available from 128 to 1536 megabytes. AWS Lambda function execution is limited to a maximum of 5 minutes. You are constrained by deployment package size and the maximum number of file descriptors. And your request and response body payload cannot exceed 6 megabytes. The event request body is also limited to 128 kilobytes. The number of concurrent executions is a soft limit which can be increased upon request. And AWS Lambda is built on the number of times your code is triggered and for each 100 millisecond of execution time. It's really simple to build your Lambda function. You configure your Lambda environment, then you upload your code and watch it run. It's as simple as that. So now let's do a quick demo. We're going to build an image recognition app. So I built a really quick little app in which we have a website hosted in Amazon S3. When you upload an image, it will trigger a Lambda function which will then process that image and generate a thumbnail. Creating a Lambda function is really easy. Here you can see I'm in the AWS console at the Create function page for AWS Lambda. You can see I already have a number of Lambda functions here, and we're going to look at the Check S3 Public Access Lambda function. So we simply hit Create function and name our Lambda function, and here's what that looks like. You can see I've got my Lambda function name up the top left, and I'm now configuring my Lambda function. I've chosen my runtime, in this case it's Python. I've named my handler, and I've added my Python code. In this case, this Python code, this Lambda function, is checking my S3 buckets, and if it sees any buckets with public access, it then revokes that access and then sends me notification. While I'm configuring my Lambda function, I can configure environment variables if I want to apply encryption. I can apply tags. I can choose an execution role. In this case, I've chosen a role that gives my Lambda function the necessary permissions to operate. And I can configure my Lambda function's memory allocation, in this case 128 megabytes, and its execution timeout. I've left it at the maximum of 5 minutes. Next, I move on to configure my trigger. In this case, I'm using CloudWatch events to trigger my Lambda function. And you can see that I have one CloudWatch event. That event is enabled, and it's used to watch changes in an S3 bucket, and it triggers this particular Lambda function. I can now look at my monitoring page for my Lambda function, and you can see here under invocation count that this Lambda function has run 4 times. When this Lambda function runs, I'm sent a notification that, and you can see here for an S3 bucket called iFoul public, it had access to everyone. This Lambda function has revoked public access from this bucket, and it has also updated CloudTrail. With AWS Lambda, we can run code for virtually any application or back-end service. AWS Lambda use cases include automated backups, processing objects uploaded to S3, event-driven log analysis, event-driven transformations, Internet of Things, operating serverless websites. Let's explore a real-time image processing use case. A customer uploads an image on S3, triggering a Lambda function to process that image immediately. You can use this to transcode videos, thumbnails, index files, process logs, validate your content, and aggregate data in real time. One of our customers, the Seattle Times, uses AWS Lambda to resize images for viewing on different devices such as desktop computers, tablets, and smartphones. You can use AWS Lambda and Amazon Kinesis to process real-time streaming data for application activity tracking, transaction order processing, clickstream analysis, data cleansing metrics, generation log filtering, indexing social media analysis, and device data telemetry and metering. We have customers processing billions of data points in real time using AWS Lambda to process historical and live data stored in S3 or streamed from Amazon Kinesis. They can process 100 billion events each single month. You can use AWS Lambda to build your extract, transform, and load pipelines. You can also use AWS Lambda to perform data validation, filtering, sorting, or other transformations for every data change in a DynamoDB table, and load the transformed data to another data store. Zillow uses AWS Lambda and Amazon Kinesis to track a subset of mobile metrics in real time. They are able to develop and deploy a cost-effective solution in just 2 weeks. You can also use AWS Lambda to build your backends for your IoT devices. You can combine API Gateway with AWS Lambda to easily build your mobile backend. API Gateway makes it really easy for you to authenticate and process those API requests, and AWS Lambda makes it really easy for you to build and develop those rich, personalized app experiences. Most of our customers use a microservices backend using AWS Lambda, SNS, and API Gateway to run both their website and their mobile applications. You can also use AWS Lambda to build your web backends by combining AWS Lambda and other AWS services. Developers can build powerful web applications that automatically scale up and down. Those applications run in a highly available configuration across multiple data centers with zero administrative effort required for scalability, backups, and multi-data center redundancy. So in summary, we like to think of AWS Lambda as the connective tissue for AWS services, from building microservices architectures to running your applications. I hope you learned a little something today, and we'll continue to explore other courses. I'm Ian Falconer with the AWS Training and Certification team. Thanks for watching.